When we are shattered by life, how do we reassemble ourselves? I'm Mindy Corcoran, and on April 13th, 2014, my life was shattered when a domestic terrorist murdered my father and 14-year-old son, as well as another woman. This white supremacist had come to a Jewish community center in Overland Park, Kansas, planned this ambush with the intent to murder Jews. My Christian father and son were not his intended victims. They were just at the wrong place at the wrong time. Their deaths shattered my soul. Perhaps you too are a shattered soul. My new book, Healing a Shattered Soul, was written for those of you who are grieving a loss or have suffered a trauma. It's for those of you who are seeking inspiration, and for those who are searching for a glimmer of hope and faith, and for those in need of support during a difficult time. I'm sharing my story because I am a shattered soul, and I am now in the process of healing that shattered soul. My objective in life right now is to help other people heal, to make something good come from my dad and Reet's deaths. I am doing this because I believe God has asked me to do it. Grief and trauma are invisible. When we are experiencing grief and trauma, you cannot see it. You can't see anywhere on me that I have suffered greatly and that I still have grief, and that I have instances of anger, and sometimes I get very short-tempered. You cannot see that on me. You cannot see it on me like you can see a broken arm or a broken leg, or if I had a bandage on me. But just because you cannot see it does not mean that it is not there. Outlined in my chapters of my book are the story of how a shattered soul ached to find the glue it needed to piece myself and my family back together. As you read my book, you will find my journey heartbreaking, authentic, thought-provoking, and most of all, I hope you find it inspirational. My faith in God and humanity concretely paved my path to healing. My work with interfaith groups of Christians, Muslims, and Jews, and all other faiths has restored my belief in the goodness of humankind. I got a lot of help along the way as I have been grieving. People have held my hand as I have walked this journey, and that's what I want to do for you. Together we can shine a light on peace. Together we are better. I'm Mindy Corcoran, and I'd love for you to join me on this journey, healing a shattered soul.
Mindy, hello.
Hello, Eliana.
I'm so delighted to be here with you. Friends who are listening today, thank you so much for joining us. We're here live. This is an opportunity for you not only to learn about Mindy and her story, to talk about her new book, but also to participate in the conversation. So whether you're listening today with us through YouTube or through Facebook, I hope that you'll take a moment maybe to enter a comment or to ask a question during our conversation. We'll be together for about 45 minutes to an hour, and we'd love to hear from you. So my name is Alana Mueller. My company is called Coffee Lunch Coffee. And what I do is I help people build better, more meaningful professional relationships through networking. For many, many years, I've had a very dear friend, Mindy Corcoran, and I've been fortunate, despite the tragedy, despite the heartbreak, to have sort of an insider's glimpse into her life, her family's life, and to be sort of a companion on her journey. So Mindy, thank you so much for being willing and being transparent with your own story. It truly is an inspiration. So I would love actually to level set and bring our listeners in with us today. For those of them who may not have had an opportunity to see an advanced copy of your book, I would love for you just to maybe read a portion of the introduction so that people get a sense for what information you're going to share in the book.
Okay, thanks, Eliana. Thank you so much for this conversation as well. So from my introduction, in the past 7 years since my father, William L. Corcoran, MD, my oldest son, Reet Underwood, and Teresa Lamano were murdered, the trepidation, anxiousness, and anger built mostly in the weeks and then days ahead of a significant event. The hollowness I felt on April 13, 2014, while holding hands with my dearest friend, Tara Freeberg, in front of a crowd mourning the unthinkable, finds its way back into my soul as commonly celebrated days announce themselves on my calendar. The month of May 2020 found me and all of you literally in the throes of COVID-19. The familiar feelings of anger and pain, like a couple of distant cousins whom I recall meeting but don't enjoy visiting, get my attention. The first sign of these feelings is slight and irritating. When the news of the pandemic was vast and unrelenting, causing immediate fear of the unknown in all of us, my personal physical changes did not stem from the uncertainty of the newly announced virus. These intimate feelings were once again working their way through my body. Periodically, as a reminder that healing is a lifelong journey, tears found their way into my eyes and then down my cheeks. During my morning walks, tears started to fall more frequently. When I say fall, I mean flow. As grief and sadness take over my heart, I lose control of the tears. I had found a safe place to sit with the pain, or rather, walk through it. Allow me to describe the physical sensations. A heaviness in my chest arrives. My breathing becomes uncomfortable. I'm short of breath, enough to feel as if I'm out of shape. I will notice the heaviness in my chest and initially contemplate if I am just out of shape. My brain isn't far behind my body. My brain will then take the feeling of heaviness, shortness of breath, and a low level of fear, which would be described as anxiety or trepidation, and place a visual memory in view. I'm in the parking lot of the Jewish Community Center. It's at this moment when I succumb to the realization of what I know will be. My typically amiable and thoughtful self will attempt to fight off the pain, push it away, push it down, so that I don't go into the darkness. I do not go down the slippery slope of pain and darkness alone. I grab everyone around me, or at least I want to. My irritable mood, erratic behavior, strange decision-making, and stream of tears are a clear sign. Conversations with everyone in my life are more difficult as I am mentally grasping for any of them to stop the known and unwanted wrenching pain of loss. With effort, practice, and yes, even time, I have learned to use my breath as a conduit to channel the pain, allowing the pain to progress but not to debilitate me. With concentrated effort, I sit quietly with a pen in hand and a journal on my lap and write.
That's so just, again, heart-rending, inspirational, touching. Mindy, I want to pause our conversation for just a moment. We are having a little bit of audio trouble with your headset. I wonder if you can remove the headset and maybe talk through the microphone in your computer.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm way much better, I believe.
Okay. All right, good.
Good. I do hear some of the echo, so I wonder if you maybe turn down the audio a little bit, if that would be useful.
How's that? Is that better?
That's great. Yes, much better. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thanks for letting us know.
So I want to talk about this notion of bringing people together, because to me, not only in the introduction that you shared with us, but really as I read the book, that's what it felt like. It was you've found a path to bringing people together for healing, for understanding, for really sharing one's story and connecting people, which is all about, from my perspective, what Coffee Lunch Coffee is about. So, as I think with my professional cap on, how can this benefit people from a relationship building perspective? That's what I've been thinking about. So today you've brought us together, not just the two of us, but our listeners today, to discuss how grief affects us, affects our home lives when we've had a loss, affects us at work and in the workplace. And, one of the things that I remember feeling like very touched by was just the sense of guilt that you had, for not being the one who drove your son Reet to the audition that day at the Jewish Community Center. You also were the one who selected the date of the audition, the time of the audition, and you bottled up this guilt within you and held it there for over a year without sharing that with anybody. What made you keep that inside before you decided to share that with someone else?
Well, the first word that comes to mind is probably shame. I felt responsible. I felt shame for placing my dad and Reet in that place, and that I felt like I had some type of control over what had happened and responsibility. And I was concerned that if I talked about it, then other people might say, yes, they agreed. And I didn't want anyone to agree with that. I didn't want to have that conversation with people. I was having it with myself. But just like when we hold a secret of something that we did wrong, or we hurt someone's feelings and we don't admit fault or open up that conversation and air out the wound, it was festering in me and it was causing me so much more grief that I needed to write about it and get it out and make it public. And I made it very public by writing it in the book about the guilt that I had for scheduling the date and the time of the audition, and then the fact that they were there at that exact time as the shooter had planned to be there.
Mm-hmm. So even though this was not a decision that you had anything to do with on the receiving end, you felt that because somehow you had made that choice, that you had toyed with fate in a way.
Yes, I questioned a lot of things. I questioned if I was a good enough Christian. I questioned if I had given enough in life. I mean, I just, how could something so horrific happen to us? And did I have any responsibility for it? And so I guess I was looking for that, looking for something concrete. And it was painful. It's painful to address it in that way.
Of course, of course. One of the things that I was struck by is that in the book, and I'm going to quote from the book, you say, the hate he, meaning the shooter, exploded on our families, shattering numerous lives, would always be part of our journey, but not part of our focus. Can you explain that, especially in the context of what you've just described, this feeling of guilt that somehow the situation was your fault or had happened by your hand, but once you acknowledge that it was really somebody else's doing, can you explain that notion that it will always be part of your journey, but not part of your focus?
Yes. So to make him not part of our focus, we don't speak his name.
Yeah.
And frequently, I don't remember his name. On occasion, an interviewer might say his name, and I have to think to myself, who are they talking about? So we don't say his name. We don't give him a platform. That is how he's not part of the focus. We just thought about everything that we could at the time. The kindness that was coming into us, we wanted to send it back out to other people, and that helped build the Faith Always Wins Foundation and our 7 days of kindness. And so that helped us heal. Considering and taking time thinking about the shooter is not healing. That's not helpful. I had to process how they lost their lives. I had to process that in and of itself. And I have to remove the person who did it from a lot of my thoughts so that I don't stay in an anger or hate space. I don't want to stay in that space.
Yeah, I that makes sense. And it makes sense that, you're not going to say his name. You're not going to give him a platform. He no longer has a voice in this conversation. That it's something very different now. And I actually want to go back to something you said earlier when you were talking about you needed to write it down. You needed to write the story. You needed to sort of air out the feelings of guilt that you were having. People handle grief so differently, and you and I have had many conversations about this. But talk a little bit about that. Talk about kind of the catharsis you went through by writing it down, by writing a book. I myself wrote a book, and I remember when I was writing the book, I thought I never had a book in me. I was never a writer. I was a math major. I'm much happier with numbers than words. And yet there it is. There's the book. And so same thing for you. You were not specifically a writer, although I'm sure you've always been a good writer, but that was not really your personal area of bliss. And so talk a little bit about what that was like to write it down and how that felt, especially when knowing that other people were going to read about that.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say it wasn't my area of bliss, because as a young girl, I remember having a diary for a very short period of time. It didn't last long. And then I remember at some point in my adult life, people talking about the importance of journaling, which did not last very long either. So I wasn't writing on a personal level in any stretch of the imagination until the murders happened.
Wow.
And then when they happened, people brought us journals. In fact, the journal I'm writing from and using right now, it was the first journal I got in 2000, in April 13th, 2014. Like that first week, Margaret Reynolds handed me a journal as a gift, but I never used that one. It seemed to me that that one was very sacred. And I used a lot of other journals, and now that's the one I'm actually picked up and using now, right after I finished the book. So the writing helped because there were so many things I couldn't say out loud.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Lucas, our son Lucas, didn't want me to say Reed's name out loud. So if I wanted to talk about Reed or talk about my dad, I couldn't talk about them very easily in my own household. I could talk about my dad with my mom, but to be able to vent when I needed to do it personally and writing it down. And much of my journaling, a lot of my journaling took place in nature areas, like a park, Ironwoods Park in particular.
Yeah.
And then at the Wesley Chapel at Church of the Resurrection, I went every Thursday for an entire year and would write and write and write. So when I felt joy, when messages came to me, when yellow butterflies appeared, when people said they had a great memory of my dad or Reed, I would write it down because it was something that I wanted to remember. But I think specifically I started writing because I needed to have a conversation with them and with myself, and I needed to have it out of my system.
Yeah. Yeah. And, again, back to this notion of people grieve so differently. Did other members of your family keep journals, or were they able to write things down? Did they have an easier time sharing their feelings with others, or did they have people that they went to even in private conversation?
I don't know that anyone else wrote things down. My older brother, Will, has considered writing a story about my dad as a doctor, as a physician, but I don't know that he journaled about his feelings, and I don't know. None of them have said anything about writing notes or journaling. So if someone had done that, the person that comes to mind would be my Aunt Gail. So maybe my Aunt Gail, my dad's youngest sister, might have done that. She might be a journaler.
I can imagine that. That makes a lot of sense. That she'll have to let us know. So that's great. That's great. You mentioned your mom a few minutes ago. I want to talk a little bit about your mom and some of the information that you shared with your readers in the book. So your mom, obviously, she lost her husband. She lost a grandchild in the shootings. She describes her feelings that night, the night of the shootings, as vacant. And you describe that her vacancy lasted for months, leading to several health problems. While your mom's mind was vacant, your own mind seems to have been reeling. And you kept playing and replaying those days' events over and over and over again. So you obviously experienced a very different set of initial reactions, and you were, again, grieving differently. Why do you think some of us react so differently to the same events?
I think that as humans, we react to trauma or something that happens that shakes us or is a disruption based on past experiences and experiences we might have had in the past, and then what we learned from that, like maybe a pre-challenge. So I had experiences in my life that were not at all close to this tragedy, but I had experiences in my life that were embarrassing, that were humiliating, that made me sweat and turn red all over. I mean, I had a lot of life experiences with, corporate people, opening a business, teaching in front of people. I mean, just all these experiences. Whereas my mom had experiences in theater, but she also didn't feel at that point in time as independent as I was.
Mm-hmm.
And she lost her life partner. They started dating when she was in high school, and they were in high school, and they were partners from that time forward. So I think she literally felt like she would not survive without him. Whereas I immediately had Len, my spouse, and Lucas, another child, who immediately needed me. And that was so apparent even in the
Mm-hmm.
emergency room. And
Yeah.
so I think it's life experiences that then perhaps dictate how we experience something new that happens to us. And so, for instance, the trauma support that we received, that Reet received in particular on premise at the J, he got support from people who had experienced how to take care of someone in a trauma situation. And so people use that some kind of innate feeling. Tony, went right into using organizational skills and skills he had from his work and from being an Eagle Scout and his life experiences. And he helped gather people together and communicate at the hospital. So I think it's life experiences, and the enormity of my mom's loss was that she lost her life partner, knowing that there wasn't going to be that life partner there, and trying to fathom what that might be.
Makes sense. And just to clarify for our audience, for those who may not know who Tony is, Tony's your brother.
Younger
and
brother.
The younger brother and the baby of the family. And it's interesting. So each of you sort of relied again on this notion of your life experiences, what you knew, what you were an expert in. And interestingly, in this situation, your mom was an expert in your dad, and they had been there for each other. And that was how they coped. And so you're right. I mean, you had people, first of all, around you that you lived with and that immediately needed you. And so it is sort of a different experience for each individual. You talked about, the assistance that people receive based on people who have those different kinds of expertise. When somebody's a bystander or sort of a third party to a situation like this where there's grief, it strikes me that we often don't know how to behave. We don't know what to say to somebody who's lost their immediate loved one. When somebody's suffered a loss, sometimes it feels awkward for the onlooker or for somebody who's there who wants to provide support, but they don't know what to say or do. But I know that you had and have a group of friends who were absolutely extraordinary in the way that they supported your family after the shootings. Can you talk a little bit about the team of women who supported your family? And I believe they did so in 2-hour shifts, if I'm not mistaken. What did they do? How did that happen? What kind of tasks did they take over in the corporate Lawson household? And how did they get organized? Because I do think that so frequently, we want to be there for others when we know that they've suffered a loss, but we don't know how to be. And it sounds like these women knew what to do, and they descended on your family and took care of you. Can you talk about that?
They did descend for sure. And what I did is I didn't say no. I just didn't say no. I don't know if I could have physically said no. I don't think I knew to say that. I just opened the door and Kathy walked in. Kathy Sheikovitz was the first person who came to the house with that intent. She came to the house with her laptop and she set up as if to run a household, and things that they did. So she organized it by collecting people's names and emails and saying who wants to help and when can you help. And they did rotate 2 people in our house every 2 hours from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. for almost 10 days. And the things that they did were anything that you need in a household. They walked our dog Lucy. They fed our dog. I'm sure they probably had to buy dog food, so I'm sure someone did that. They set up our kitchen for meals. They made sure that I started to eat on about the 4th day. They made sure that Lynn ate. They made sure Lucas ate. Somebody drove Lucas to school, and I know that Kathy drove Lucas to school once or twice. So they did everything that as I should have been doing as a parent, but couldn't. Like,
people saw me functioning, but there were many things that I couldn't do. I just wasn't thinking that he needed to go back to school, or that somebody needed to get him in the car and drive him there. Mike and Shelley Miller said Lucas needs a suit. They went up into his closet and he didn't have anything to wear for the funeral. And I remember Mike standing next to me and he said, hey, we went to look in Lucas's closet and he doesn't really have what you might want him to have for a funeral. So Shelley and I are he didn't even finish the sentence. I said, go, go. They took Lucas to a movie. They got him out of the house away from me for a while. And big things though, Alana, one woman stepped in and printed the photographs that we used at the funeral. Those were really big photographs. Another woman in her company stepped in and printed the programs for the funeral. So they helped with small life events, small life things like food and laundry and cleaning the house and walking the dog. But then they also helped with really significant items, which included planning for the funeral.
Yeah. I love that you started with, you decided not to say no. And I suspect, and I know that we share some things in common, I suspect, like me, you were pretty much used to telling people, no, I've got this. I've got this. And so that must have, first of all, felt really odd. So I'm proud of you for not saying no. So that's great. I think we should all learn that, with or without grief, first of all. And I've heard you talk about this before, but I want you to go a little bit further. So you're talking about people just sort of said, okay, Mike and Shelley said, we're taking Lucas to purchase a suit. Kathy said, get in the car, we're going to school Lucas, or took him to a movie. What's interesting about each of the things that you said is nobody asked you for permission, or what do you need me to do? And honestly, I ask that question all the time, how can I be helpful? Or you let me know how I can be helpful. And I've heard you say to me over the last several years, it's difficult for the person being asked, what can I do to help? It's difficult to come up with tasks. And so what you're describing these women doing is they didn't ask you for permission. They knew that the laundry needed to get done. They knew that Lucy needed a walk or needed to be fed. They just did the things that need to be done, not only in daily life, but in this very unique situation. And so would you talk a little bit more about that, about how do you approach people now when you know that they've suffered a loss? Because I know that you do a lot of things. How do you, from a relationship perspective, help to kind of assist them in their grief without saying, what can I do to help, when they don't know what to tell you?
Right. And it is important. And I appreciate that you noticed that the way that I said it and the way I referred to how people walked in and helped, and I just didn't say no to them. What I do now on a tangible sense is paper products. So when someone loses a family member and you're about to have an onslaught of people in your home, you're going to need paper products. And that seems kind of like, that doesn't seem very loving. That doesn't seem very heartfelt. But if you are having a home full of people and you run out of toilet paper, it's kind of a problem. And so there were two women who showed up at our house with paper products, a huge box of paper products, paper towels, toilet paper, plasticware, paper plates, napkins, and cups. And I remember looking at that thinking, we're never going to use all of this. We did use it. And so think to yourself, whoever the person is in your life that this has happened to, think, what do I know about them and how might I be able to help them? One thing that I think we do make a mistake on is we throw things at people in the first 3 weeks. We throw things at them and we want to help immediately, and we want to grab and help. If you're not sure what to do in the first 3 weeks, that's okay. Calendar it, because they need your help later. Especially if there's a death. And again, this may come across as crass, but when someone has died, they're not coming back. And I would say to people, Dad and Reet are not coming back. You can do this for me in 3 months. You can do this for me in 6 months. I think it's really important that if you don't know immediately what you could do, it's okay to think about it. It's okay to send a card that says, I'm sorry. And to consider thinking about that and calendar it for 3 months later or 6 months later on the anniversary, and then send them a gift card for a meal or invite the family over to your home. We did at some point need to get out of the house, and we had friends invite us out 3 or 4 weeks later, and they said to Lynn, will Mindy leave the house? And Lynn said, yes, we will. And they said, we're going to cook a meal. Can you be over at this time? And then we just kind of did. We did that. So you don't have to do everything immediately, but I know the immediate response is you want someone to know that you're thinking of them and you want to help them immediately. When there is a death involved, they need help for a long period of time.
Yeah.
An entire year. So schedule it on your calendar for later and address them again at a later time, and see what it is that you might be able to help. But it seems kind of silly, but immediate needs are paper products and running a household. And that includes walking a dog and doing laundry.
Yeah, I love that. I love how tactical that is because it's something very specific. In fact, one of our the comments in our chat here that Ruth shares is she wanted tips on how to approach a friend or loved one who had lost somebody but lives far away. And I think you just gave some really good ideas. I mean, first of all, this notion of sending a gift card for a meal or for groceries, I think that's great. Maybe scheduling a visit several months out. And I know, the time of Corona changes a lot of things, but there are ways now just to come back together as we're beginning to see. So I love that you have given some very tactical things. I don't know if there's anything specific that people from out of town did for you or that you now do for others when they live in another city. But I do think that's an interesting concept.
I think if someone is out of town, then maybe the card initially is helpful, but 3 months later and 6 months later, then if you have a book you want to send it later. Send it, I received 9 Jesus callings. Okay, 9. And they all came very quickly. And so then what I did is I kept them. And then as I felt like I needed to give them to someone, I had gifts to give to other people. It was a wonderful gift. I just received them all at once. And so if you know that you have like this go-to gift. Okay, so let me brag for just a minute. Maybe my book is a good gift for someone later.
Yeah.
Maybe someone says, I read your book and I think your book would be a great gift for someone. Don't give it to them in the first month. They are not going to be ready to read my book in the first month. But that's something that you can consider in 6 months or 9 months to give to them with a personal note. I just gave someone a Grubhub gift card who, I live in Florida now and they're in Kansas, and my other friends were able to go and help her pack her home. They're moving and I couldn't be there, and I wanted to help. Well, when someone's packing up their home, they don't feed themselves. Right. So I got them a pretty significantly sized Grubhub card and said, here you go. Eat on us for a long time. And she was very thankful for that. She has teenagers in the house.
So it might not last as long as you think it'll last then, right?
Right.
Well, I love the little humor piece there. So I want to shift gears again, and I want to talk a little bit about my pal Lucas, your youngest son, who is just such a great guy, one of my favorite human beings. So Lucas came up with a clever way to get you and Len to laugh after so much sadness. Can you talk a little bit about what Lucas did and how he got you to laugh?
I've watched every Will Ferrell movie there is. I have seen Will Ferrell's naked butt so many times. So
you can't unsee that, right?
I cannot unsee Will Ferrell running in his underwear or whatever. He likes to do that, and it's his own show, so he can do that. So we watched lots of funny movies. And I remember Lynn saying to me one evening, I don't want to watch a funny movie. And I said, I know, but this seems to be what he needs us to do, is to sit together in the living room and start laughing together. And Lucas would say to me privately, I really want to hear Dad laugh. I really want to hear Dad laugh. And I don't know if he said to Lynn, I really want to hear Mom laugh. So get her in there. But we did. And they were just any comedy that he could find. And I have to tell you, Alana, he still does that. When he came home over the holiday, he comes up with those really stupid movies that are just silly. I'm like, okay, we'll watch that one again. So I would love it if Hollywood could come up with some new ones so I can see a new funny movie with Lucas. That would be great. Any
And maybe without
suggestions?
Will Ferrell, right?
Any suggestions would be helpful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe our listeners today can enter their favorite comedies into the chat. And these have to also be teenager worthy comedies, right? So
Yes. Yes. I
we
think
want Lucas to watch them too.
my favorite funny one that I will always watch is Old School. Is it called Old School? I think.
Yes, that's a good one.
Oh yeah. So if Lucas wants to watch one, I'm like, okay, I'll watch that one. I'm not as big a fan of like a Talladega Nights, although I've seen it, but again, I've seen all of them about 6 times.
And maybe we just need some new actors. We need to go with like some Steve Martin, go with The Jerk or something a little different than that, right?
Yes.
That's good. Or Office Space, something like that. So
Yes.
But
Yeah.
I like his idea. Well, in all seriousness, just the fact that he said, I want to hear my dad laugh. I want to hear my mom laugh. I just think there's something so incredibly precious and beautiful about that. And the
It
fact
is
that
beautiful.
he recognized that was the thing that had been lost. That's something that was missing, is incredible. And I think that, leave it to kids to realize what's going on. So that's amazing. Really
Right.
amazing. So let's talk a little bit more about Lucas. You were, I thought, so amazingly transparent and honest in the way that you shared the way that Lucas struggled in his own grief and how you struggled to be his parent during that time, and maybe still do in some ways, right? Parenting is something that goes on and on and on, and so you said that I'm going to quote you. You said parenting Lucas after their deaths had its own layered complications, which I thought, to me, again, sort of heartbreaking, but incredibly honest, and maybe something that some of our listeners today can relate to. What were some of the most challenging parts of parenting, and how did you rise to the occasion and meet those challenges?
Okay. The most challenging times of parenting Lucas were when he wanted to do something that any normal, typical 13 or 14-year-old would want to do. He would want to go to a party, as a freshman that might have juniors or seniors at the party. And, I would want to say no to that. I would say, no, that is not right. But Alana, as a hurting, grieving parent, I was so exhausted and broken and shattered. It's hard to fight that. So when you don't have the grief, it's a struggle to say no to your kids and to explain why and to come up with the best reason why not. And let's do this instead. Let's redirect. When they're 2, you redirect.
Mm-hmm.
But when they're 14, they're in your face. Everybody's doing it. I don't get invited to other parties, all of these things. And I was just so broken and exhausted. There were a few times when I said to him, I can't parent you very well through this. I know that I'm not going to let you go to that, but I have to leave the house right now because it's not going to go well if I stay here. And I would make sure someone was there with him and leave. But I did have people rescue us on occasion. So I learned early on from a group called Love and Logic the importance of calling in reinforcements and to not being afraid to call in reinforcements. And I didn't need it until after the deaths of Dad and Reed, and Lucas and I were really struggling. And on a couple occasions, I called in reinforcements. And one time, Mike Miller was available, and I said, "Where are you?" And he told me, and I said, "Can you please meet us in the parking lot?" And it was right outside of like a grocery store. And he met me, and Lucas made fun of me. And he said, "Oh, you can't parent me on your own. You need help." And I said, "Yes, I do."
Yeah.
I said, "Yes, I need help." And so Mike showed up, and Lucas got out, and he was with Mike about 5 hours. Mike took him grocery shopping, took him to his son's basketball game, just kept him busy and engaged. And I had a break. And those are just things that happened along the way. And it really had to do with the fact that parenting is difficult. Parenting a teen is difficult. And then after losing another child, I was just so exhausted. I didn't have the strength that I normally would have had.
Yeah.
And I needed someone else to come shore that up because it was for the benefit of Lucas. There were things that, we didn't let him do that we didn't allow him to do things that we wouldn't have let him do normally. You see what I mean? But it was
Yeah.
harder, and I needed help in getting him on that path.
Well, it was in a different context, but I remember when I was working on a project and I was trying to decide what part of town to focus my efforts. And I knew that there was a particular area in the Kansas City metropolitan region that was already working on something related to my project. And I remember somebody, a pretty senior leader in the community, saying to me, Alana, it's not cheating. It's not cheating to utilize the resources that are already in place. Just leverage them. You're leveraging your resources. And to me, it sounds like you were leveraging your resources. So Mike, yes, he's a parent also, but he is a family friend, a trusted adult, somebody that was already in Lucas's life, somebody you trusted. And so I don't think it's cheating to call in those reinforcements. So I think the fact that you were able to do that you recognized that you needed that was the thing that you needed for your own healing in that moment. I think that's pretty remarkable. And I think we should all remember that. And so if we're not the ones who need the reinforcements at the moment, we can be the reinforcement for somebody else. So, I like to, for purposes of our conversation, I think it's so important today to be thinking about which side of the coin are we on? Which side of the equation are we on? And do we need that assistance, or can we lend that assistance? Is it something that we have the capacity to give? So I love that you were able to do that. I really do.
I appreciate you saying that on both sides, but I want to say very clearly, if a parent, if anyone listening thinks that they're about to kick their kids out of a moving car, you need reinforcements.
Yeah.
And that's where we were. I just thought I was gripping the steering wheel and I was so angry and he kept at me and I just said, I need help. And so I do think, and that's the same thing when Kathy walked into the house with her laptop and set up, I didn't say no. And so when this was happening, I reached out. Who can help me? And it's so important to have these people around us so that when we do need it, we can reach out. But like you said, why was Mike there for me? Mike was there for me because I'd been there for them.
That's right.
We had been family friends and I had been there for them when they had traumatic events happen in their life, and I had been there. And so think about your friend group and make yourself available. Like you said, make yourself available to be that caring friend for whoever in that family might need your help.
Yeah. And I mean, and to be there in the good times and the bad times, I think, especially when we've been able to both celebrate and grieve with one another, I think that makes a difference because we know that we can trust one another and that we can be there for each other irrespective of the circumstances. So I love your story. I think that's really important. I want to talk a little bit about Len. I want to sort of bring him into this conversation too. And I remember this. I remember that he suggested that you move to Florida to follow Lucas. For our listeners today who may not know, Lucas at some point decided that he was going to attend school in Florida. And Mindy actually goes into some detail about how that happened in the book, so you can all learn a little bit more about that. But I remember you said, and you shared this in the book, that a counselor suggested to you that you get in the canoe and allow Len to take you where you were supposed to be. And that the canoe wasn't a real canoe, but that you were supposed to get in that canoe and paddle right alongside. And so can you talk a little bit about that? What did that mean? And how was the canoe ride?
Yes, I was so angry. I wanted to stay put. I wanted to, I didn't necessarily need to stay in the same house. We came to the agreement that we would stay in the house a certain amount of time, and then we would sell the house, and then we would do something else. Well, then we had a big discussion about selling the house more quickly. And that was a lot of anxiety because I had to go through Reed's things again. That meant I had to touch everything, that I had to touch Reed again. I had to lift it up and unpack it and move it and see it and smell it and just know that I was doing this again without him. So that caused a lot of anxiety. And then when he said we took Lucas to Florida and we got back in February, or we were talking in February, and he said, I just think we need to move to Florida. I was full of anger how how that happened. I was not at all ready to do that. The canoe part happened at the same time. The canoe conversation with this counselor in particular was Cookie Harvey. And this happened at the same time she said to me, you can't move forward if you have dead flowers in your house. And in the process of preparing our home for sale, said Lynn Lowson had thrown out some very important dead flowers. Yes. And I was beyond livid that these dead flowers were gone. These petals that I thought needed to be saved forever and ever and ever had been tossed. And yet, on the same day, I had an appointment with Cookie, and she just looked at me like, so matter of fact, you can't move forward with dead flowers. And I'm like, okay. And then
there was a sign in there.
And then the canoe, and get in the canoe. He knows where he's going. And I have to admit, when she said that, I thought to myself, well, I don't know where I'm going. So if he knows where we're going, I should probably get in the canoe and go with him. So it wasn't a real canoe. It was, just a metaphor of life, that he felt this great passion and need to parent our living child. And I was parenting our deceased child. I was holding on to everything Reet. And I was struggling with parenting our living child, because our living child was angry at me a lot. And, when someone's angry at you, you go, okay, someone else deal with that. If you're angry at me, I want to stay over here because Reet's not angry at me. And, I had to really think and deep down about what that was going to look like for me. And I jumped in the metaphorically created canoe and moved to Florida. And Lucas has asked some pretty deep questions about, were Lynn and I close to getting divorced, and were Lynn and I going to possibly separate? And I said, if I had not moved to Florida, that would have been part of the conversation. And that's all marriages have, these times in their lives, these times in relationships when you make big decisions and you come to an agreement. You either do or you don't. And if you don't come to an agreement, then you look at the relationship and say, what does this mean about the relationship? And I valued my relationship. I valued Lynn. I valued our marriage. And I said, okay, I will get in the canoe and go to Florida.
That's really, first of all, thank you for your honesty and for sharing that. I think so many people need to hear that. And I think the metaphor works. It works. And we can all imagine those metaphorical canoes that we probably need to get in and just paddle, just go with it. So I like that. I want to sort of begin to bring our conversation a little bit to a close. And I want to talk, the name of the book is Healing a Shattered Soul. And so for those of you listening today, I know that there's information in the chat about where to pre-order the book, but I want to talk about the soulfulness piece of this because I think it's important. Mindy, at the site of the shootings that day at the Jewish Community Center, I know that you believe and in your heart of hearts that God spoke to you that day. And I've heard you say it many, many times, but you said, you told me and you've told many of us that what God said to you was, your Father's in heaven, go find Reet. And since that day, you've continued to hear God talking to you. And I believe that God's asked a great deal from you. Right, you've become sort of a messenger, and
I think he's asked a lot of me too.
Yeah, and you're like, yes, he has.
And sometimes it's hard to follow. Yes.
Well,
sorry to interrupt.
No, not at all. Talk about how you're going about fulfilling those demands, so to speak. What requests have been made of you, and what are you doing about it?
Yes, I think that he has asked a lot of me, and I sit sometimes and think on it a lot, and I journal about it. I write about it. Sometimes I talk to people live about it, or I'll talk to Lynn about it. Writing the book, I didn't really necessarily know or think I needed to write the book on my own, but I kept getting this pressure to put my story all together. And what that means is, because of Faith Always Wins, because of the event 7 days, because of workplace healing, there's so many pieces and parts to Mindy Corporon that literally, I think God wanted me to just go in this journey of helping others heal, bring my people together. Bring my people together was what I kept hearing. And what happens, Alana, is when I don't follow it, I hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And when I do follow it, the hurting subsides. You know, I can talk about my dad and Reet, and when I talk about them, I can smile and I can find joy. I'm not saying I don't still cry, I definitely do, but I have the ability to talk about them because I know I'm following the right path. And I think that many of us get asked by a higher spirit. We feel that nudge or an intuition that maybe I should do this, or maybe I should reach out to that person and say something. So many, I can't count how many times someone comes to mind and I think I should call her or I should say something to him. And then I'll message them and they'll say, that was perfect timing. How did you know? And I'm like, I didn't know. It was just put on my heart. I don't know. And, but when I follow through with especially the hardest tasks, but really even the little nudges and intuitions, when I follow through on those, my heart doesn't hurt. And to anyone who's listening that has lost a child and that pain, you don't want to feel that pain. It is excruciating. It's a pain that you didn't realize as a human that you could feel. And so I don't want to feel that. And I will choose to listen to what I think God is asking me to do to not feel that pain.
Let's continue down this path. I want to talk a little bit more about faith, but I want to put it in the context of the workplace. You know, there's some conventional wisdom out there that has taught us, or at least taught me growing up, you're not supposed to talk about religion or politics at work. And you know me well enough to know that I violate this every darn day of my life, every single day. And in fact, you've created a lot of mechanisms where you actually encourage people to violate that old conventional wisdom, which I think makes no sense since it's so much in the mainstream and all around us. And by the way, those people in the workplace are human beings that they have joys, and then they also have great suffering. So let's talk a little bit more about grief in the workplace and what that means. So how soon after the loss of a loved one or a close friend do you think people should return to the workplace?
Wow. So I don't know that I can say how, when I think someone should return to the workplace. When you do choose to return, you should return. Okay, let me say it this way. You should return to the workplace when it feels like it's the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. You shouldn't return to the workplace if someone wants you to, but you don't want to.
Is there something that employers can do to help with that process, whether it's a return or simply showing support to somebody who's had a significant loss?
So if you need to return to the workplace, which most people do, most people need to return and they don't have an option to not return. When you do return to the workplace, what your employers can do is address the fact that you are not healed and that you are healing. Mm-hmm. And that to give you a soft landing, what I say is a soft landing and reintegration, is to allow for you to say to them how much capacity you have on any given day. So understanding how much mental capacity someone has after a trauma is so key. I had capacity so I didn't go into the office for any kind of work at all for about 3 weeks. I did start going back, and I would just check email for about 30, 40 minutes, and then I would have to leave. So I wasn't really working. I was literally physically kind of testing the waters. Mm-hmm. And if that's possible for people, then I recommend it. But from an employer's perspective, again, and a manager, you want to address the fact that someone is hurting. You want to schedule time with them as soon as you can, even if it's a phone call to them at their home, or asking them to meet you somewhere, or you going to their home. I know it's uncomfortable, but put yourself in their home and say, I'm sorry this happened to you, and we're here to help you, in whatever way that we're going to be able to help. But what I don't want employers to do is say, take all the time you need. Yeah. Because we want to say that as an employer, we want to say, oh, take all the time you need because it sounds so nice and it sounds like the right thing to do. But an employer's take all the time you need and a grieving employee's take all the time you need are very far apart. And I can't take my hands further apart or you wouldn't see them.
Right.
So they're really far apart. And thank you. And so that's not a good answer. What the conversation needs to be around, how much capacity do you have today? Let's say, I say I can come in on Wednesday, and my manager would say to me, okay, when you get here on Wednesday, let's check in. And then when we're checking in live as a manager, I want to say, how much capacity do you have right now? And literally that the person coming back to work, they may have just they may have gone for a walk. They may have had a good coffee and they may say, I'm great. And they might be really great for 2 hours. But then when they don't have capacity, I want them to say to the manager, I need to check out for a little bit. Maybe they'll have capacity again later that day, but it doesn't last for hours at a time, this capacity. It diminishes because our brains are tormented by the anguish that happened in the trauma.
Well, and somebody in the chat had said earlier, how do you manage those waves, the waves of grief that you don't expect or anticipate? And I think that's kind of what you're describing, is that our capacity ebbs and flows based on our mood, how much sleep we got last night, what we're thinking about, how ingrained we are in the work versus how we're contending with this trauma that we're experiencing. So I think that matters, right? And I like how you said that. As an employer, to say take all the time you need, well, they may never come back, and you need to know that, right? Because the work doesn't stop. The work doesn't stop.
Correct. And I was in a position as a co-founder of a company and a CEO, and I knew from that logical position that I couldn't really just take all the time I need, because that would have been way more than they needed me to take. They needed to know when was I going to be back and what was my capacity. And so that is important to have those types of conversations. In terms of the waves, when you do go back to work, discuss with your team, discuss with your manager, where is a safe place for you to have quiet time? Yeah. Is there a private room that you can go into? Maybe you have your own office and you can shut the door. But if you're in like a cubicle area, which is very common, is there a private space? Do you have to go to your car to cry? What I want people to do is to have a safe environment where they can go and let that emotion out. Because when the emotion starts building up, that fear, that anxiety, that trepidation, and the tears are about to fall, you make erratic decisions, you say things you shouldn't say, you lash out at people when you shouldn't, and you don't want to. And so you need to take those emotions and allow them to flow out of your body in a nice environment for you, so that when you do go back into the workspace, you can have a conversation again. I mean, Alana, if I needed to have a big cry and I could go have a big cry, I could come back. I could look a mess. I would look a mess, but I could work again. My brain was a little clearer because all that emotion had gotten out of me. So I want people to understand, go have that emotion in a safe environment in your workspace if you can, and then come back and give the capacity that you can. We all want to be valuable. We want to be offer value, and we want to someone to think that we belong at the company. That's typically what we want. When a tragedy happens and it's chaos at home, we want to find some value in our workplace.
Yeah, and I think, we want to deepen our sense of belonging, whatever space we find ourselves in. So I think that makes great sense. And I love how you said, be able to find a space to release that pent up anguish, and so that we can then get back to the business at hand. So I love that. Mindy, this has been, for me, such a wonderful experience to be able to have this conversation with you. I want to thank you again for your honesty, your transparency, your openness, and your willingness to invite all of us in, not just me and not just our listeners today, but really the world. I think that that's something you're doing. You're encouraging us to engage in courageous kindness, to heal our shattered souls when we have suffered a loss. And I'm just so grateful to have you in my life. So thank you for that. So I want to give you the chance to give any closing remarks you'd like to make. And I want to thank all of our listeners today.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Alana. Well, I absolutely want to thank my publisher, Front Edge Publishing, for walking alongside me. I didn't know if I could be a writer. I didn't know what all the words on the page, if they were going to make sense, and if it was going to resonate with anyone. So they did. We found one another through Bill Timaeus, and I'm just so grateful that they have walked alongside me and helped me every step of the way. So that's Front Edge Publishing. And then I also just want to let people know that as part of my book launch tour, I will be in conversation with Pastor Adam Hamilton on May 3rd, and it'll be similar to this format. It'll be live again at 3:00 Central, and I appreciate you, Alana. I appreciate that we had a friendship ahead of time filled with joy and fun and moms talking and working women, and then you held my hand along the way as well, and you're part of healing my shattered soul. So thank you so much for today.
My privilege. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining us. Have a good day.